been able to understand, the Soviets had prepared an invasion force for Europe at that point, but were not concerned with having to defend their territory, and so they were caught completely unawares by Hitler's move.
That's not entirely accurate.
The Soviets were planning to attack. Which history books are you reading? Who wrote them? Were they by the Nazis? Or some right-wing website are you reading? You are good at making things up, aren't you? Or are you trying to justify the Nazi attack on the Soviet Union? Well, are you? Allow me to educate you on what actually happened. The USSR did not have full-scale invasion plans for Europe, as no plans have ever been found. However, let's explore this topic in more detail, shall we? The USSR did invade two places prior to World War II. That was firstly in Finland, in which they were defeated. Secondly, in Poland. Please note, the invasion in Poland was in agreement with the Nazis, which was part of their non-aggression pact. There is some other evidence here that I am going to explain, which could be used to justify your statement. There was a defector from the Soviet Union. His name was Vladimir Ruzin. He did say that the Soviets were planning to attack, and most of his evidence was highly circumstantial, such as a military build-up. And secondly, Stalin was overconfident in his abilities to take over Europe, as the Western powers were completely exhausted from World War I, and the USSR could simply sweep in. And he also mentioned that Hitler's own intelligence had identified the USSR were planning an attack, but this is highly circumstantial and no evidence ever been provided or found. The Nazis were the aggressors. They attacked Austria first. Then they took over the Czech Republic and then Poland. The invasion of Austria and Czech Republic was to unite the German people who were living in Austria and the Czech Republic. Secondly, he wanted to regain the territory between, which was back then, Prussia and Germany. He wanted to unite the fatherland. Furthermore, Hitler had, in his own words, said he wanted to expand Germany, making an empire that would include the lands to the east. A great German empire, the Third Reich, that would last for 1,000 years, something on par with the British and French empires. That would replace the inferior peoples by killing and enslaving them, so his Aryan people could live there. This was the main reason why he wanted and encouraged large families. And the Nazis, by starting the Nazi breeding program called Lebensborn. Let's not forget that fascism and communism was complete opposites, and Hitler was in the process of eliminating communists in Germany. Let's give you another wider context of history here. During the year 1917, who was the one who allowed some of the exiles, the Russian exiles, back into Russia? Who arranged their transportation through Germany, through Europe? Who did that? That was the Germans. The Germans were the ones who allowed Lenin back into Russia so he could destabilize the Russian Empire. So they would leave World War I, which was true, but they unleashed a weapon of mass destruction, which was communism. And this was in the hands of Germany, and this is what they did.
There was a brief thaw. Stalin was pretty much out of the picture by the end of the 1950s. There's some indication that he was murdered by Khrushchev, and Khrushchev became premier of the Soviet Union after Stalin. And there's some indication perhaps that Stalin was either murdered by Khrushchev and a set of his cronies, or when he was very ill, just before he died, was not helped, at least wasn't provided with any medical attention because of the intervention of Khrushchev and his cronies. Now, there's some indication as well at that point that Stalin, who was an absolutely barbaric in every possible way you could imagine, was planning to start a third world war. And he was certainly capable of doing such things because he had already imprisoned or killed tens of millions of people.
Stalin was murdered by Khrushchev? Well, there is yet again no evidence of this. However, I do like to say that was a good thing that he died. And if Khrushchev did it, well, he did the world a favor. However, the next statement, I do believe, is a fallacy. And you're trying to justify, yet again, how bad the USSR and socialism or communism is. You have stated that if a man sends millions to the Gulag, he is more than capable of starting World War III. May I remind you, who started World War I and World War II? It was not the Russians, it was not the Soviets, it was Germany. And did Germany send their millions of people to the Gulag? They didn't in the First War. Whether they did in the Second War, well, that's still not concrete evidence, is it, to justify your statement? Sorry, this is a fallacy, as these two things aren't equal. Also, I'd like to remind you of Napoleon. He also started a wide range of wars in Europe, but did he send his people to the French equivalent of a gulag? No, he did not.
After that, he wrote a number of other books, which are also, he's a great literary figure in the same category, I would say, as Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, which is like really saying something. You know, those two are.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn is in the same category as Tolstoy or Dostoevsky. I'm sorry, but this is another example in which Jordan Peterson likes to oversimplify things. How can this author of the Gulag Archipelago be considered in the same category as two fictional writers? As you are aware that Tolstoy and Dostoevsky both were fictional writers. They wrote great works of fiction, while Mr. Solzhenitsyn wrote a book on non-fiction. How can you categorize him in the same category as two fiction writers? Or are you regarding him as a great fiction writer? That is another example of where you try to oversimplify things. How about this? It is wrong for us to say that Stephen King is in the same category as, let's say, William Shakespeare, or even another literary figure. How about, could you also consider George Orwell in the same category as William Shakespeare? This is another example where you have oversimplified something to make sense for your students and the people listening to you on YouTube, but this is incorrect.
The things that's really surprising to me and that I think is absolutely reprehensible, is the fact that this is not widespread knowledge among students in the West, any of this, and it's because your education...
Well, I cannot say for your students, but I can say something from the people over here over the pond. We are well aware of the situation, what happened in the USSR and the number of people died there. Well, I do know that the people over there aren't the most resourceful bunch, and also you are a psychology teacher, so your sample size of students you've taught is very small. I don't think that your students would be well versed in history, as you are teaching psychology rather than history. And also I've noticed how your voice had changed. Are you trying to promote fear in your listeners? Are you trying to terrify them of how bad left-wing politics are? May I provide you some truth here? No matter what the political party is running a country, if they're right-wing or left-wing, if they're bad, then bad things will happen. No matter if they're left or right. That's the truth. Point. Why is this information not taught? Well, this information is freely available to anyone who wants to know it. The students need to have curiosity to look for this information and learn it, to understand it. However, most students today can be considered as the snowflake generation. They have no interest in learning history or the lessons of the past, because they don't know is that history does and will repeat itself. And may I also like to remind you, yes, this is true that this occurrence, what happened in the USSR, was terrible. There is no justification of this, and I accept that. But can this be considered as one of the most terrible things to happen in human history? Let's put this into perspective. Did society collapse during this time? Did we see the worst time in human history? Did the level of education and scientific discovery go down during this time? Did the level of literacy rates decrease? No, it did not. There was a time in human history in which all these things did happen. This was the Bronze Age collapse, in which people forgot to read. Major cities abandoned. Major civilization that lasted longer than ours all disappeared. The great civilizations of the Indus Valley River, the Hittites, the Assyrians, all disappeared. Why isn't this information taught? I guess for you, anything that is not biased towards your white people, that is important, isn't it, for you? But what about the rest of us? This type of disinformation has to stop. I need your help. I need your help. If you have found this interesting and informative, why not help in making more videos? Please follow the link to my Patreon page, subscribe to this YouTube channel,